for joining us. Mr. Anthony, I don't know if you heard our talk with one of the Hamas sympathizers. What he was saying is that some Palestinians believe that Israel's performance in attacking their mosques in East Jerusalem and trying to evict Palestinian families from East Jerusalem was something illegal. What is your response to that?
Well, my response to that is that that's a total mischaracterization of the situation. The dispute in Sheikh Jarrah is a property dispute. It has been adjudicated by the Supreme Court of the State of Israel in favor of the returning tenants. And the Israeli government has a choice to make whether or not to uphold the findings of the Israeli Supreme Court or whether to deny the tenants their rights. That's a property dispute. It in no way, shape or form ought to be or possibly can be in any human, regular, acceptable situation seen as justification for what is now more than 1,500 rockets being fired specifically to target Israeli citizens, specifically to target the Israeli citizenry and the civilian infrastructure of the State of Israel.
A big part of this confrontation between Israel and Palestinians is about property, really. It's about land. And we know, according to international law, East Jerusalem, according to international law, is occupied by Israel. And Israel's presence there in itself is illegal, isn't it?
No, Israel's presence in East Jerusalem is far from illegal. The city of Jerusalem, as we celebrated in recent days, was reunited following the events of the Six-Day War, which was a preemptive operation undertaken by the State of Israel, preemptive but entirely defensive in nature. And once reunited as the victors in that particular conflict, not only in accordance with what typifies the outcome of a hostile conflict, namely those who prevail in the conflict are able to hold the territory that they take hold of, in our case that we reunited, but also in accordance with our history, our international law, the mandate for Palestine, and also in accordance with our religious beliefs. There is nothing illegal whatsoever about the presence of the Jewish people in East Jerusalem. And as much as some in the international community, not all, might counter that, I can tell you that the Israeli people are simply not in the business of surrendering Jerusalem, any part of it. Jerusalem must remain united. It's not just not a settlement. It's not just our capital city. Jerusalem is the pulse, the heartbeat, the very heart of the State of Israel. And one cannot reasonably carve up one's heart and expect the broader organism to survive. So we'll stay exactly where we are in Jerusalem. I think it's clear to see that we remain resolute in doing so.
Okay, but the UN Security Council has a different opinion, but let's not get into that. Okay, let's talk about, do you think we're at the verge of an all-out war here?
Well, I don't know if we're at the verge of an all-out war here, but I can say that I, as a citizen of the State of Israel, that I'm currently in New York, as a citizen of the State of Israel, as a veteran of the Second Lebanon War, Operation Pillar of Defense, Operation Protective Edge, I very much hope that in the event that a ground incursion does take place, it takes place and is allowed the opportunity to maneuver and to be carried out and to be prosecuted in a manner that will ensure that we will not return to these hostilities a mere year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now. I personally view the problem emanating from the Gaza Strip, that problem being Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, as a strategic problem for the State of Israel, one that we must tackle while we're able to do so. And I would like to see the entire Strip cleansed entirely of these militants, these terrorists, those who target our innocent citizens and civilians in the State of Israel. I would personally be in favor of a wide-scale, sustained ground incursion into the Gaza Strip with a view to dismantling the infrastructure of Hamas, dismantling the infrastructure of Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and really destroying the infrastructure of both of those organizations. And I would like to say that we would be effective were we to emulate the examples set during Operation Defensive Shield, in which we cleansed various areas of Judea and Samaria of similar terrorist militant elements. It's been done before, it can be done again, and it ought to be done again, because the situation that we face in the state of Israel is absolutely intolerable, unacceptable, and untenable.
So what about hundreds of thousands of people, 2 million civilians in Gaza, if you want to cleanse Gaza, as you said? So Palestinians are already saying that you're ethnically cleansing them.
Well, I first of all, with regard to ethnic cleansing, I don't see how you or anybody else or any Palestinian Arab who might say that can possibly reconcile the notion that the mighty Israeli military is at once ethnically cleansing the Palestinian people, while at the same time we're constantly told that the demographic threat emanating from the Palestinian Arabs is the greatest threat to the existence of a Jewish and democratic state of Israel. The two cannot be reconciled. One is true, the other might be true, but certainly both cannot be true at the same time. That's on the issue of ethnic cleansing. On the issue of the 2 million people living there in the Gaza Strip, I'm sure that you aren't for a moment suggesting that all 2 million of those are terrorists. I'm sure you're not for a moment believing the notion that all 2 million are seeking to cause harm to the Israeli people. In fact, I'm sure that you, as I, believe that the vast majority might be innocent of any such crimes. I'm talking about targeting Hamas. I'm talking about targeting Palestinian Islamic Jihad. The Israeli Defense Forces knows well how to differentiate between militants, terrorists, and innocent civilians. And I think that the numbers at the moment and in all previous campaigns speak to that fact. Consider for a moment the mighty Israeli military, which we're told can wipe out everybody and all of the Gaza Strip in just a couple of days. So far, the number of dead in the Gaza Strip rests at the figure of 58 civilians. So turned civilians. We'll wait to see in the after-action reviews whether or not they were all civilians. 58 lives lost is obviously regrettable, but the reality of the matter is it's actually indicative of precision, of restraint, and of exact strikes upon militant and terrorist strongholds. And I have no question whatsoever that the Israel Defense Forces will act appropriately, resolutely, and of course humanely. But don't forget, our first call is not to defend the Gaza Strip. Our first call is to defend and to protect the people and the state of Israel. And right now, the people and the state of Israel, including Arab citizens of the state of Israel, are under attack by way of indiscriminate rockets being fired from the Gaza Strip towards our people, towards our land, towards our citizenry, and towards our civilian infrastructure. That is what they are targeting, and that is what we have a responsibility to beat back. If there is concern about innocents in the Gaza Strip being hit or being struck during an operation of the Israel Defense Forces, I politely suggest that the state of Israel ought not to be provoked into any military response by Hamas.
Okay, in these attacks, as you say, humanitarian attacks by Israel, 14 kids, children, have been killed. Okay, but let's put that aside. What do you see the role of Iran in the midst of all this? How important do you think that is?
Well, first of all, I certainly can't put aside the idea that 14 kids have been killed. I think that the death of any individual who is not involved in hostilities is very, very lamentable. I will tell you, however, talking of children, every single child in the state of Israel is living day and night in bomb shelters, hiding, seeking shelter from the rockets that are launched by Hamas. It is those rockets that have stirred the mighty military of the Israel Defense Forces, and it is the defensive measures undertaken by the state of Israel that have brought about, unfortunately, collateral damage, but it could all have been avoided were it not for Hamas's depraved acts of targeting Israeli children. Israeli children, by the hundreds of thousands and even the millions, are living below ground in shelters. Let me explain to you that approximately 2/3 of the Jewish population of the Jewish state are now firmly living within the trajectory of these rockets. To bring that to the international listeners' context, were the United States of America, where I currently am, to take incoming from its eastern seaboard, everything west of the eastern seaboard up to approximately the state of Colorado would be within the trajectory of these rockets. That's not acceptable. It won't be accepted, and it cannot stand. And so we must act, I'm afraid.